Hi guys, welcome to Binge Watch Britney. So for today's episode, we are going to be covering season 1 of Vampire Diaries. So let's go ahead and get into it. So to start this episode off, I want to go ahead and talk about some of the characters first, and then just some observations that I have from watching the show, and then we will also get into the plot for season 1. Vampire Diaries came out in 2009. I actually watched it live when it came out, and I remember it just being kind of like so different from some of the other shows that I was watching. I wasn't really into Buffy the Vampire Slayer or anything like that, so I had seen like episodes on TV like in the mornings before like elementary school, middle school, and high school. We would watch TV before we went to school, and so some of those TV shows would be on, and I never really got into Dark Angel or I'm sorry, it's not Dark Angel. Dark Angel is a show that I love because it has Jessica Alba in it. Maybe it's just called Angel, but there's another like witch or warlock TV show in addition to Charmed, and then Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I never really got into those shows. And so when Vampire Diaries came around, obviously it's in 2009. It's younger people, so people my age, and I don't know if I knew that there were books at the time, but I had definitely never read the books, and I still haven't read the books, and that's totally fine, totally okay. I really did enjoy watching the Vampire Diaries. I don't think I watched it consecutively as each season aired. I think I watched for maybe the first like 4 seasons or something like that, and then kind of fell off. And so recently, I watched Vampire Diaries, and I think this is my second rewatch of it, because I vividly remember, like, the ending and how, like, that went down and everything like that, but there's different, pieces in between, obviously, the last season and the first season that I completely did not remember, and so it was just interesting to do a rewatch and then just see things that I didn't recall or things that I didn't even remember happening. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed rewatching the Vampire Diaries. I'm not even sure how long it took me to rewatch it. Right now, as of recording this video, I am actually on season 7. So I feel like it's been pretty quick that I went through this. I'm looking at my notes now to see when I started this note, but it updates based on when I make modifications. So I have no idea when I first started watching this. Probably if I had to say, either the beginning of August or late August. So, and it's almost the end of September now, so about maybe 2 months for me to kind of get as far as I am in the series. Alright, so let's go ahead and just talk about some of the observations. So, being that it is 2023, TV shows are obviously very different from how they were when they came out when I was a child. And so I feel like the TV shows like One Tree Hill, I love One Tree Hill. I love Degrassi, 90210, Moesha, Seventh Heaven. A lot of those different TV shows that I watched growing up, they just felt completely different. And I also don't know if that's because back then Hollywood was such like a huge deal, and those movies were like high quality. So if you couldn't get into Hollywood, obviously you did TV movies, or you did TV movies and then you did TV shows that aired on TV, and so even that had to be high quality. And so I feel like nowadays we have a lot of stuff that's airing on streaming services. Streaming services do have good quality TV shows, but they also have more TV shows that just aren't up to par with what would have been released in the early 2000s. So when Vampire Diaries was filmed, or when it came out, I didn't really notice how dark the show was in terms of lighting. So it's more on par with what you would see in Riverdale, which is kind of like that, not necessarily demonic energy, but it's just really dark, and it's not like as bright as something like To All the Boys I Loved Before. Like, that's a really bright show. It's a really perky, happy show. and it's just a complete night and day difference between the vibes that the shows give off. And so now let's go ahead and talk about some of the characters. So first up, we have Elena and Matt. So they were dating in high school. They grew up together, and they're kind of like destined to be together, being that I think their moms or their families were best friends growing up, and then they had kids, and then Matt and Elena are close in age, and so they were like, oh, it would be cool if these two dated when they were older. And so you know how you have those parents who try to push their kids to date and be romantic and have their own families and all of that. And so that's very consistent with what we see in The Summer I Turned Pretty, where Belly, we know that she's going to end up with either Conrad or Jeremiah. I'm definitely Team Jeremiah, by the way. Anyway, now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more, this topic of two teenagers being like destined for each other because of the fact that their families know each other and they grew up basically next door or close to each other. This reminds me of a book called The Pact by Jodi Picoult. So basically, you have the same situation I'm talking about in The Vampire Diaries with Matt and Elena, and with Belly, Conrad, and Jeremiah from The Summer I Turned Pretty. You can go ahead and check out the book if you're interested in that sort of thing, but just as a trigger warning, the topic of the book is kind of intense, so just keep that in mind. So before the show starts, we have Matt and Elena. They break up and they're no longer together by the time that we actually see the first episode in season 1. So then we have Bonnie. So Bonnie, she thinks that she's psychic, and this is kind of just interesting to see because she's not really aware of her powers yet. And then she does have a grandmother who is a witch and actually like knows her stuff, and they just don't take her seriously. They think she's just a kooky old lady who's just like making up fairy tales or stories about witches or whatever. And so it's really cool to see Bonnie kind of like embrace her powers as the season and as the show progresses. And so one thing I want to highlight about her family, the Bennetts, is that I love seeing Jasmine Guy in the role of her grandmother. Obviously, I know Jasmine Guy from a different world, and her voice is different, that accent that she talks in a different world. And then obviously just seeing her as a older actress was kind of cool, because usually everyone is wanting to be young and be in all of the hip and cool movies as the younger actor or actress. And so just having her play a kind of, not a major role, but a significant role in The Vampire Diaries as Bonnie's grandmother. And so when I had watched it originally, when it came out in 2009, I actually felt like Jasmine Guy seemed like so much older than she actually was. Like, looking back now, I'm like, oh wow, she looks so young, even though she was probably, in her 30s or 40s. I have no idea how old she is, but she just looks so young to me on a rewatch. And so I enjoyed seeing her in that role. And then there's some other notes that I have about Bonnie, but they're also kind of related to the plot. I'm just going to go ahead and touch on those just to get that information out there. And so Bonnie is crucial into us understanding kind of who Stefan is. He's a vampire, and so because Bonnie's coming into her powers, she touches Stefan, and I think the words that she uses to describe that experience is that he just felt like cold, he felt like death. And so obviously he's a vampire, and so these are accurate feelings that she's getting from him. And so I think it's just interesting that we have Bonnie, a witch, being the first one to like notice that something is wrong with Stefan, and so, or something is different about him. And so next we're going to talk about Caroline. And so Caroline is kind of a very controversial figure in The Vampire Diaries, in my opinion. She is very she's not necessarily a goody two-shoes, but she likes to do things, as you would say, by the book. She takes on as much responsibility as she can. She's actually good at all of the different responsibilities that she has, and she's very high-strung. And so Caroline's biggest thing is that she doesn't really think before she speaks, so that's good that she's able to just say what she wants, and then she kind of like realizes after the fact that she may have offended someone. But in the world that they are part of, it's actually good that she's willing to speak up and say what she feels is either right or isn't right, but sometimes she just goes overboard with it, and she had a lot of moments throughout season 1 and throughout the rest of the show as we get into a later season where she kind of just completely overstepped her bound. And so obviously she is one of Elena's childhood friends, and so they're actually kind of in competition with each other. I would say more accurately that Caroline is in competition with Elena. I don't think Elena is actually competing with her, and so obviously with the show being completely centered around Elena, she gets all of the attention, people cater to her and all of this stuff, and so that's kind of what Caroline has experienced growing up as far as Elena technically getting everything that Caroline has wanted. And so let's just go ahead and talk about Matt. So on a rewatch, I kind of realized that Matt reminded me of Tim Riggins from Friday Night Lights, and I had never seen Friday Night Lights when it actually aired out on TV. I have only seen it more recently within like maybe the last 3 or 4 years. I definitely did not watch it before the pandemic, and so he definitely reminded me of Tim Riggins. I love Tim Riggins from Friday Night Lights, and Matt reminds me of him because they're in a small town. Matt really only has football, and he only has football, and he doesn't really, as far as the storyline, there's no real future, it seems, for him in football. We just see him kind of transition from being Elena's boyfriend to her ex-boyfriend to the football player, and then to this vampire hunter, or this person who takes down the bad guys. And so he has a hard time adjusting to Elena moving on, because the whole time Elena's thing was that she just needed, I guess, to be alone, and she just needed space. She outgrew her relationship with Matt, and so it's hard for him to hear her say that she needs space, and then she just moved on so quickly with the new guy. And so that's a sucky place for him to be in. He ends up moving on to Caroline, and they have a thing. And so I just think that it's very interesting for him that he's in this role as kind of like a caretaker of his older sister Vicky, and so her storyline is a whole thing in season 1, and I feel like Matt does get the short end of a stick sometimes, but he's also uses everything that he's been through to kind of take it out on other people, and so he ends up not being one of my favorite characters in this series, but yeah, we can talk about that more in depth as those things happen. And so the next person I want to talk about is Tyler. So Tyler plays a significant role in the Vampire Diaries. He's part of one of the founding families of Mystic Falls. His family is super rich. His dad is the mayor, and he's also part of this friend group with Elena, Matt, Caroline, and Bonnie. He's just superstar athlete. He says whatever he wants. Whatever he wants. He's arrogant, and he gets with all of the girls, and so he's not initially well liked because he just comes across as a jerk, but he does play a huge role in this show. Next, I want to talk about Vicky. So we have Vicky. She, for some reason, I don't know why this was, but I actually thought that Vicky was Matt's younger sister. Obviously, this doesn't make sense just because of the ages of everyone. So I knew that Matt and Elena were similar in age or close in age, and then I knew that Jeremy was younger. And for some reason, I thought that she was Matt's younger sister, but she's obviously his older sister. And so that's interesting, where Matt feels like he needs to take care of Vicky. I feel like Matt is definitely more responsible than Vicky. He is kind of more on the straight and narrow, even though they are considered to be from the wrong side of the tracks. Vicky is more hardcore into doing all of the things that she's not supposed to be doing. And so she ends up getting herself into a situation where she becomes a vampire, and then she's just out of control. And so I think we talk about that later on when we go through the plot. So I'm not going to say much about that now. Next, we have Jeremy. So this is Elena's younger brother. He is basically shut down after his parents' death. So we don't actually see anything about the parents' death. I think in season 1 we do see flashbacks later on. But in season 1, we have like the aftermath of the parents dying, in the car crash, drowning in the river actually. And, Jeremy, he's not doing well. He's, coping with drugs and, hooking up with Vicky. And, he just has a lot going on. And so he's kind of getting a pass from all of the teachers in school with what he's doing, but he also has had so much time to kind of like grieve that he's kind of pushing everyone's limits as far as how much they're willing to tolerate from him as he's going down this path of spiraling. So next we have Damon. He's basically the resident bad boy. He is just reckless. He's feeding on everyone, and he ends up coming back. And I love the scene where you know that Stephanie is a vampire. You know that Stephanie is like kind of like the only vampire in town for a while, and then you see like this crow following Elena around, and then you have, I think, Stefan in his room. There's like a gust of wind, and then you see Damon, and he's like, "Hello, brother." And I just think that scene is so cool because one, that's the first time that you see Damon doing like his little one-sided smirk, and that's all I can see every time I look at him. Like, I don't think he has any other facial expression, and so it's really hard to see him like how he was before he did Vampire Diaries, because that one look is literally all I see when I look at him. And so he had a lot of things that happened to him in season 1, or that he's involved with in season 1. And so we're just gonna go ahead and go to the next character. We have Jenna. So Jenna is Elena's aunt. I believe she's Elena's mother's sister. We have Jenna. She is taking over the responsibilities of raising Elena and Jeremy. She's not really great at it just because she's never been a parent before. I'm not sure how much younger she is than Elena's mom, but she seems like she's closer in age to Elena and Jeremy, but not necessarily so. And so she just has a lot on her plate. She has to get adjusted to being basically a new mom and learning how to handle teenagers. She's not taking over for toddlers or younger children. She's handling full-grown teenagers who can basically be somewhat self-sufficient, and they don't need her as much, but she still needs to be able to like lay down the law and keep them in line and just make sure that they're on a good path. And so next, what I want to talk about is the plot line for season 1. So some of the stuff we've already talked about, but we're just gonna actually kind of run through how it happens as the season progresses. So as I mentioned, we have Elena's parents dying. This obviously sets the course for everything that happens to Elena and Jeremy going forward. We have no idea if anything would have been completely different had they still been alive and not have died the way that they did. So that's just very interesting to think about, because could things have been different? Would they have never encountered vampires the way that they did? Would they have eventually moved away at some point? Or would they have taught Elena and Jeremy how to handle vampires before they actually came across one in the real world? And so those are just all different things to think about. Next, we have Stefan. He's new in town, and he meets Elena. And so how this happens is, I can't recall if this is talked about in season 1, so I apologize if I'm jumping ahead to another season, but Stefan is actually the one who saved Elena when her parents had that car accident and she was in the car with them. And so he knew who Elena was, in the sense that she looked like Catherine, and so we finally have them when season 1 airs and everything like that. We finally have him actually meeting Elena in school. So he enrolls in school. Elena's in the bathroom talking to Jeremy, and Jeremy's in there doing drugs until she's yelling at him. She's in the boys' bathroom, and she comes out and she bumps into Stefan. And I actually think that he like intentionally bumped into her in that moment. It wasn't just something that happened randomly or coincidentally. So anyway, so one thing I want to mention about their relationship is that it is super intense very fast. Obviously, Stefan is really drawn to Elena because of the fact that she looks exactly like Catherine. And then we also have Elena. She's fresh off of her breakup from Matt. She's still like recovering and dealing with her parents' death. So they are just really drawn to each other, and they kind of get serious really fast. And so how their relationship plays out in terms of her finding out about Catherine and that Catherine looks like her, I think is kind of shady how that happened. And if it isn't clear, I am clearly a Delina fan. I'm not a fan of Stefan and Elena together as much as I like her being with Damon. So I just wanted to throw that out there because that is kind of like a source of tension in the relationship, his history with Catherine, and just how they're not presenting it as that Catherine happened hundreds of years ago. They're literally making it seem like he just broke up with Catherine and he's just trying to get over that relationship. We have that happening, and then we also have, as I mentioned, Caroline is in competition with Elena, and so she wants Stefan. She does everything she can to kind of like get close to him, and obviously he is more interested in Elena because she looks like Catherine. He wants to get to know her better. He wants to know if she's anything like Catherine, and so we have Caroline putting herself out there, and she's just kind of like getting rejected, and this just kind of gets her depressed because she's not really sure why she always falls short when it comes to Elena. And so one thing that I learned recently is that Caroline, I think, isn't one of Elena's close friends in the book. I also found out that a lot of the character traits that Caroline has in the show actually belong to Elena in the book, and so that's just really interesting to see kind of like a character change in Elena, because in the book she wasn't likable, but then in the show she kind of is a little bit more likable. But then you have Caroline, who's completely, I wouldn't say like nobody likes her, but it's harder to kind of be friends with someone like that, who's always competing with you and who's always quick to offend you because they don't really think before they speak. And so we have her, Caroline, we have her kind of like hooking up with Damon because she's kind of like on the rebound. Even though she wasn't really dating Stefan, she was still like shot down by him, and so she's dealing with those emotions, and so she's kind of on the rebound with Damon. They hook up. Damon's just feeding on her, and this is obviously a very, very tricky topic to talk about because we know that vampires kind of like compel humans to like not scream or not react or whatever when they're feeding on them, but just like the whole intimate aspect of their relationship, that's kind of like touchy, and I don't really want to talk about that, but I do want to acknowledge that there's all of these different things that go into how that relationship developed. But in terms of just speaking of the relationship in terms of how it went down, Damon was basically just sleeping with Caroline. He didn't really have any intentions of like dating her. He was just using her, and then Caroline is obviously in the position where she doesn't really realize that this is happening, and it has nothing to do with like necessarily being taken advantage of by a vampire, but it just speaks more to Caroline's mindset of how she is so starved for attention that she's willing to take attention or get attention from this person who clearly doesn't care about her in the way that we would hope that she would find someone to care about her. And so we can go ahead and talk about the next thing that happened next, or the next person. So we have Bonnie. So as I mentioned, Bonnie really came into her powers in season 1, or at least learned enough about them to be able to do some things. And so we discover that Bonnie is from a long line of witches. She is obsessed at this point with becoming psychic because there are different things happening that she's able to like pick up on. So like I mentioned earlier, she's able to touch Stefan and she realizes that he feels like death, that he's cold. She's able to do that cool feather trick with Elena. And then we also have Bonnie. She comes into this talisman, if I'm saying that correctly, which belonged to her ancestor Emily. Okay, so I just want to take the time to note here that the talisman is actually important to Bonnie Bennett's family because it was what Emily used to lock the vampires in the tomb. And so the fact that Bonnie is reunited with it is super important because it was something that wasn't in the family's possession. I mentioned earlier, I think that Damon had had Caroline take it when they were in, I think, the Lockwood's house or something like that. And so just them being reunited with something that belongs to their family is an important moment. And then also we do have Bonnie. She, through that talisman, she was able to connect directly with Emily's spirit or something like that. And so Emily actually possessed Bonnie and she destroyed the talisman because she couldn't let the vampires get out of the tomb. And so this is actually a huge storyline that I'm not going to go further into, but I did just want to give you guys the overview of how the talisman played a role in the vampires getting out of a tomb and the significance that it has to the Bennett family. And then next we have Damon. He kills the history teacher. So to give you a little bit of a backstory about the history teacher, I cannot recall his name, but he was completely a jerk. He was one of those teachers who likes to one-up his students and show them up. And so he actually got into a knowledge competition with Stefan, which is ironic because, or hilarious for the viewer because we know that Stefan is old and he's actually lived through some of the things that we're talking about. And so the teacher is just spouting off all of these facts. He has some of his facts wrong, and Stefan corrects him, and so that's just a little bit of a battle. And then we have Stefan wanting to try out for the football team. The teacher is the football coach, and so he's not wanting to give Stefan a chance just because of the interaction they had in the classroom. But Stefan wants to play football, and so they're able to work something out. And so I can't recall why exactly, but Damon ends up killing the history teacher, and it's up to Stefan to kind of figure out how to cover those tracks so that they don't have panic really in Mystic Falls. And at this point, it's kind of a futile, it's kind of like a pointless attempt because they do have some attacks that are happening, and they're passing them all off as animal attacks, but it's really a vampire hunting these people. And so Damon is just reckless, and he's just trying to get under Stefan's skin and just make it really difficult for him to live in Mystic Falls. So then we have Elena finally finding out that Stefan is a vampire. I can't recall what moment it is that she realizes, but we have this scene where she's in her room, she's kind of flashing back to all of the different moments that she's had with Stefan and all of the things that were slightly weird, and so she realizes that he is a vampire, and I think she ends up confronting him about it, and then she has this moment where she's not sure if she wants to keep him being a vampire a secret, and she's not sure if she wants to deal with him. So this is just something that she has to work through and kind of figure out how to live this new life knowing that people like vampires exist amongst humans, and then also having to deal with keeping those secrets from her friends and the people that she cares about to not betray Stefan's trust. So next we have Vicky being turned. So as I mentioned earlier, Vicky is Jeremy's older sister. She is kind of like the wild child, and I don't recall how her and Damon actually like meet, but he's basically doing the same thing with her that he did with Caroline. And I can't recall if I think it happens with Vicky first and then he moves on to Caroline. I can't recall the order, but he basically is doing the same thing with Vicky. And so he's hanging out with Vicky, and he ends up I think turning her out of boredom. There's this one scene where they're hanging out at the Salvatore mansion. I think they're in his bedroom, and Vicky, she's like doing something, and then Damon just decides to snap her neck, and then she's dead, and then she wakes up, and she kind of like learns about what she is. And so this is kind of the turning point for Vicky, and it's only going downhill from here, because when she turns, because she's a drug addict, because she doesn't really have good boundaries in place, she's not able to transition well to being a vampire and also listening to all of the guidance that Stefan is trying to give her. So like Stefan is actively trying to coach her through this process, but she's kind of being rebellious. She's not listening to anything. And there's just one moment where I think she's supposed to be at the Salvatore house. She tricks them, she runs out, and she goes to Matt's house, but then I think she's like interacting with Matt. They're sitting in their kitchen, and then Stefan comes. She doesn't let Matt invite Stefan in so that he can help her, and so she realizes that she's a threat to her brother at some point, and so she leaves. And then we have her still trying to interact with Jeremy, and at this point Elena knows what vampires are. She knows that Vicky's a vampire. She knows how dangerous Vicky is to Jeremy, and so she tries to get Vicky to stay away from Jeremy, but Vicky is just like, I'm more powerful than you, I'm going to do whatever I want, you're not going to tell me what to do. And so this is what leads to Vicky dying, because she's threatening Elena. She had just attacked Jeremy, and then she's also threatening Elena, and then Stefan has to kill her. And so they have to kind of like play off her death and explain it as either like an animal attack or something like that. But this was inevitable for Vicky just because of all of the problems and troubles that she had before becoming a vampire, and it just made it harder for her to be a good vampire. So I think that it completely made sense for why she was killed off. So next we have Jeremy meeting a girl named Anna. They meet at the library, and at this point Jeremy, I think he's writing a paper for extra credit in class. He has a new teacher, Alaric Saltzman. We call him on the show for short, they call him Rick. And so Rick tells him that he can write a paper for extra credit, and he ends up writing a paper based on like a family journal about like weird things or whatever, or like weird stories or weird things that were happening back in the town, back in the day in the same town. And so he's doing research. He meets Anna. Anna's telling him about like another journal that she found with similar stories, and they're really just kind of like trading information to kind of like figure out what's going on. Obviously Anna knows a lot more than she's telling him, so we obviously find out that Anna is a vampire. She's partnered with like I think 2 other people, and she's trying to find out more information so that she can get Catherine out of the tomb. And so we know that this is something that Damon wants to do as well. Damon was in love with Catherine. He spent like basically 100 years looking for her, and I think at some point he found out that she was in the tomb, and so he wanted to basically figure out how to get her out. And so you have Damon and Anna basically working towards the same thing for different reasons, and they're not willing to kind of like partner up unless they have to, unless one of them is threatening the other with something that they need or whatever. And so And at the end of the day, is just using Jeremy to get her mother out of the tomb. And I'll leave it here for right now. So the next thing I want to talk about is the tomb actually being open. So we have the tomb. It is in some cave. In a kind of like not abandoned part of town, but it's in an area where people used to live back in the day. So it's kind of like in the woods and stuff like that. It's underground. And so the tomb is open. I believe they needed a witch in order to get into the tomb and also get out. So this is where Bonnie and her grandmother come in. Okay, so at this point, we have the Bennett witches involved. They are the ones who are opening the tomb, and in doing so, Anna and Elena are able to go inside. Pearl is Anna's mother. She's desiccated. She needs blood to feed. Anna forces Elena to give her blood to her mother, and so this allows Pearl to wake up and everything like that. We also have Stefan and Damon come in. Stefan obviously wants to rescue Elena because he knows that she's inside the tomb. He also knows that if he goes in, he won't be able to get out because the spell only allows humans to come out. And so he goes in, he risks his life. Damon is also inside. He's frantically looking for Catherine, and Elena is able to get out, but then she eventually finds out that Stefan is trapped in there, and so this is what leads to everything happening with Bonnie's grandmother. And then we have Damon again looking frantically for Catherine. He realizes that she's not there. And then I think at some point Anna and Pearl confirm that Catherine was never in the tomb. And so you have Damon, he's frustrated. He ends up throwing blood against the wall, and this is just blood that is used to wake other vampires who are in that cave. And so at this moment, I think is when we have Bonnie's grandmother dying. We needed 2 witches. I don't know if you needed 2 witches, but you needed powerful witches to be able to undo the spell, so that the good vampires, Stefan and Damon, could get in and out. And then we have the spell just being too overwhelming, and obviously Graham's is more powerful, so she's kind of going to take more of the impact of doing the spell. And so she ends up being okay, but later on she dies from all of the stress of doing the spell. And so because she dies basically in the middle kind of doing a spell to take down the seal, they are never able to put the seal back up. And so you have vampires, like really old vampires from like the 1800s who were trapped in that tomb. You have them able to just walk out and reintegrate themselves into the world. So next what we have is Stefan being tortured. So like I was saying, we have Anna freeing her mom Pearl, and then because the seal was not put up, we have other vampires that Pearl knew from that same time period being able to escape and integrate back into the real world. We have them, those older vampires, we have them shacking up at this kind of like abandoned house or old house. They're instructed to stay in the house, to not leave, to not cause any trouble. And Pearl is really just trying to figure out how to get back everything that they lost back in the 1800s. So she sees that the shop that she had where she was selling like potions and herbs and all of that stuff is converted into something else, and the space is not being used. I believe that the space was actually Elena's dad's doctor's office, and so she's considering buying that space back up. She's trying to figure out who all of the major players are in town, and then they realize that a lot of the founding families from the 1800s, they have like descendants who are still part of the town. And so there's this one guy who's part of that crew of vampires who were freed from the tomb. He's kind of like the ringleader, but him and him and a few other people are kind of like really pissed at the founders for like doing what they did to them, like burning them up, taking their property, taking their land, and then profiting off of it. And so they want to get revenge. And so they end up crashing like this event. I can't recall what event it was, but there's this event in the town square, and they want to start attacking the founding family members and just other citizens in that area. And so it becomes Stefan and Damon trying to kind of like hold all of that off. With that being said, going back to my point, and how Stefan ended up being tortured. So you have, Stefan, I can't recall what exactly happened, but he was attacked by one of the ringleaders from the tomb. He has a girlfriend, and for whatever reason, they go after Stefan, and it's because that guy and a few of his friends, they were in Mystic Girl, and they saw Elena and they called her Catherine, and Elena played it off, but because at this point she knows who Catherine is, she knew that those were people who knew Catherine. So she tells Stefan, tries to go and confront them, but those people leave, and so I don't recall what happened, but I guess there ended up being a fight, and then Stefan went home, and then those people attacked him in his home, and he ended up killing the girlfriend, and so the ringleader has to go back to the house where Pearl is at, and he goes back without his girlfriend. Pearl punishes him for disobeying her, and then you have him still wanting to get revenge. And so he ends up getting a hold of Stefan somehow. He has Stefan in the house. And because there's a human lady who owns the house, vampires have to be invited in. And Damon can't get in to get his brother. And so you have him being tortured in the basement by that guy. And Damon, Alaric, and Elena have to figure out how to free Stefan. And so one thing I want to point out, just to make it clear, so Frederick is the ringleader who I was talking about, who is kind of like rallying up everyone to attack the founding families and their descendants. And then you have Beth Ann, which is his girlfriend, who Stefan killed. And so what happens is you have Frederick, he's in the house, have a lot going first. He pretends to needs help. They end up opening the back door, and the human who owns the house, she gives Damon permission to come in. Damon starts kind of secretly attacking people one by one, and then you have Elena. She was supposed to stay in the car, but she doesn't listen, so she ends up going to where Stefan is being held and trying to help him. And so then you have that taking place, and then you have Damon giving her cover so that she can escape with Stefan. And then Stefan at this point is really weak because he's been drained of blood, he's been beaten, and you have Frederick in the woods trying to attack them. Elena's defenseless. Stefan is basically down, and so Elena has to give him her blood so that he can gain strength and defend them. And so at some point what we have next is Pearl is killed, and this is devastating to Anna because she had lost her mother in the tomb for all of those years and then spent all of those years trying to figure out how to get her back. She then is reunited with her mother. There's friction between Pearl and Anna because Anna basically has been living on her own all of this time, and she has made her way back to Mystic Falls. She's involved with Jeremy, and Jeremy is someone that she wants to pursue a relationship with. And there's friction at first between Anna and Jeremy because Jeremy is talking about, once he discovers that vampires are a thing, he is fixated on dying and turning and whatever. And so Anna is under the impression that because they're kind of getting close, that he's wanting to do all of this so that he can be with her. And then she finds out that he's doing it so that he can see Vicky again, and then they get into a whole argument and they separate and all of that. So then you have, like I was saying, Pearl being killed. Prior to that, you have Anna and Pearl with their friction on how they should live their lives. Pearl kind of wants Anna to stay away from Jeremy and kind of anything to do with that old way of life. And then we have Pearl, who's trying to kind of reintegrate back into Mystic Falls, and then I think she realizes that her plan is not going to work, so she wants to leave, and Anna's like, no, I'm staying. And so I just had to look it up because I couldn't recall how she was killed, but apparently I think her and somebody were trying to leave their house, and John Gilbert, who is Elena's uncle, he has deep ties with like the council and the founding families, and so he ends up shooting Pearl, and then Anna comes home and finds the body. And so from there, I'm just going to jump into my next topic that I have up here, the Miss Mystic Falls dance. So Miss Mystic Falls is a debutante ball. This was something that Elena had signed up for when her mother was still alive. And so now that the actual dance or whatever has rolled around and it's time for her to participate in it, she continues through with her plan to do it because it was the last thing that she kind of was excited to do for her mother or whatever. And so Caroline is part of this as well, and Caroline is obviously more equipped to win because she is actually meeting all of the requirements. Elena is just doing it because of her mom and stuff like that. And so at this dance, this Miss Mystic Falls dance, we have Stefan kind of struggling with like bloodlust, and so he's supposed to be Elena's escort to, like, she's walking down the stairs and he's supposed to meet her at the bottom of the stairs, and they're supposed to dance together. And so he's kind of like spiraling and he's like off the ropes, and this is because he had Elena's blood. So prior to that, he had been living off of like blood bags and I think animals, and so him having access to Elena's blood just changed him, and he's just like really struggling, and he's kind of like going off the rails a bit. And so he ends up feeding on some girl at the party, and he's not where he's supposed to be for Elena. And so Damon has to step in, take Stefan's spot, and he has to dance with Elena during the debutante ball dance. And so this just gives Elena and Damon time to bond. We obviously know that Damon has feelings for Elena. Elena's kind of like not really paying attention to him in that aspect, but she does have feelings for him, and that she cares about him as a person, and she wants him to do better, be better than he is. And so I'm going to go into the next major plot point. We have Elena meeting her birth mother. So at this point, I can say that we know that Uncle John Gilbert, who I mentioned, he is presented as Elena's uncle, but he's actually her father. We have Isabel, her birth mother. I can't recall how Elena found out that she was adopted, but she was adopted. Her mother had dropped her off at this clinic, and then her parents had taken her in. So Elena is actually Jeremy's cousin, and then Uncle John is her father, and Isabel is her mother. And so Isabel was this woman who was married to Alaric. Earlier in the season, we learned that Alaric is out for revenge. He specifically wants to hurt Damon because Damon is the one that he saw feeding on his wife, and then his wife's body disappeared. So he doesn't really know what happened to her. And so we really learned that Isabel had basically left Rick to become a vampire, and in doing so, she's not even the woman that he remembers. She is very cold, she's very calculated, she's just not a loving person. So for this to be Elena's mother is kind of shocking, just because they are nothing alike. Isabel is more like Catherine, and she's actually kind of like friends with Catherine. And so this is kind of like a huge disappointing moment for Elena to find out that she's adopted, to be able to meet her real mother, and then her real mother is not like a good person. And so I felt really bad for Rick once he really found out what happened to Isabel, that basically the life that they had together was not enough. She wanted to be a vampire. She was someone who did research on this type of thing, so she was really heavily involved in the world. And then once she got a chance to turn, basically she did. And so we kind of learned more of the backstory between her and John. They were dating when they were younger. They got pregnant, and then she gave the baby up for adoption. We also know that John has this ring that he wears wears and that he was wearing back then, and he gave it to Isabel. So Isabel has the ring, and then Isabel, when she left Rick, she had given Alaric that ring, and so now we see Alaric win that ring. And so the ring is actually very important in the Vampire Diaries timeline or plot, and it just allows people, the person who's wearing it, to cheat death and to wake up from death if they die of supernatural causes. And so what happens is that we have kind of like the backstory of how Pearl and Catherine and whatever were found out and captured. There's just, I guess, like the original John Gilbert, who Pearl was in love with, and he has this compass that has been kind of reconfigured or whatever to be able to track vampires. And so as they're rounding up the vampires, the compass points at her. He has no problem giving her up until she's captured. And so I think there's a second part of this device that Pearl has been trying to recover, and I think at one point somebody in the council had it. I think Damon had Caroline take it, and so now it belongs to him. And so Isabel, John, and Pearl are trying to get that device. And so what happens is that leads us into the Founders Day Parade. We have, somehow John gets the device back. I can't recall how. He gets the device back and he has everything that he needs to attack the vampires. And being that we know that the vampires from the tomb, they want revenge on the founding family, so they're going to obviously go to this parade. We have Bonnie. She was a horrible friend in this moment, so they had access to the device that we're talking about. I can't recall what it is, but Bonnie was basically supposed to do a spell to deactivate it. She did not. She lied to her friend, told her that she had done whatever she was supposed to do, and then she allowed them to basically give the device back to John or whatever in the state of it being able to harm the vampires. And so at the Founders Day Parade, you have a bunch of vampires who are at the parade. You have the device being set off somewhere nearby. So basically, the device emits this high-frequency noise that only supernatural beings could hear. By supernatural beings, I mean vampires. And so it's not going to affect Bonnie. So all of the vampires are impacted by this noise. They fall to the ground, they're in pain, and so what is happening is we have the mayor, who is Mayor Lockwood, who is Tyler Lockwood's dad. His dad is working basically with John Gilbert to kind of like get rid of the vampires, and so when this device goes off, you have Mayor Lockwood being impacted by the device, and he's not a vampire, so nobody knows why this is happening. The cops are just told to inject vervain into anyone who collapses and falls down, and so they do this to him. He's rounded up with the vampires, and they're put into this basement. And the basement that they're put into is actually Elena's dad's office. And so we have those people being rounded up. Stefan was saved somehow, I think, so it's just Damon who was captured. And then we have the showdown between Elena and Uncle John. Uncle John is like, you know, he's kind of like taunting her, but they have all of the vampires. He won't let Stefan and Elena go and get Damon out. And so Elena throws it in his face that she knows that he is her father, and so she kind of uses this to get him to let her go with Stefan to free Damon. And so finally we have Bonnie kind of coming back into the mix after all of this chaos that she caused. We have Bonnie basically creating this path in the back door for Stefan to be able to get into the basement and get his brother out and come. And so Mayor Lockwood, for whatever reason, he's not able to get out, so he dies. And then you have Stefan getting Damon out, and then you have a second kind of like impact from this device being allowed to be used. You have Tyler, who is driving Caroline and Matt away, and Tyler is driving, and as soon as he hears the noise or the device is activated, he reacts like everyone else, but nobody knows what's going on until he just loses control of the car, causes a really bad accident. Caroline ends up in the hospital, and so then we have all of that to get into in the next episode with what's happening with Tyler. And then we have Anna. She was also one of the people who was captured at the Founders Day parade. She is in the basement. Nobody can get her out, so she dies. And then we have Catherine coming back. So how exactly is Catherine back? So in the midst of all of this chaos from the device going off and the Founders Day parade, we have Elena. She's supposed to be getting herself home, and then we cut to the scene of Elena and Damon walking up Elena's front steps. They're having a conversation. They end up kissing, and then you have Jenna interrupting them. Elena looks super guilty. She tells Elena to come inside, and then we have this next scene of Elena walking into the house. She is there with Uncle John, her father John, and they're just having some conversation. He's trying to like tell her more about Isabel or something like that, and Elena ends up cutting off his finger. She cuts off his fingers on the hand that is wearing the ring, and then this is when we realize that this is Catherine. So Catherine has returned. She's pretending to be Elena. Nobody has been able to pick up that she's not Elena. Damon thinks that he kissed Elena, but he actually kissed Catherine. You have the real Elena coming in and having to deal with the backlash of all of this craziness that Catherine has caused. And so that's a good place to end. That wraps up this episode of Vampire Diaries Season 1. Hopefully I covered a lot of good things for you all in this episode. I really wanted to make sure that I hit on like major plot points without going into every single detail of all the little things that happen. So I feel like I covered all of the major points, and I really enjoyed watching Season 1. It was just so nice to get back into this world and to get back into this friend group, and so a lot of good stuff happening, and I'm really excited to do my episode for Season 2. So I hope that you guys stay tuned for that, and thank you guys for listening. Have a good one, guys. Bye.